Hey everybody, my name is Jared and I am a Master Mason in the state of Mississippi in the United States of America. And this video is about the Bicentennial Celebration of Freemasonry in the state of Mississippi. Before we get started, I would like to say that if you're a regular viewer, please stick around to the end of the video and I have a special message I'd like to share with you. Though of course I presume there's no way I can really stop any of you from just fast forwarding to the end. So by way of a little background information before we get into the main content of this video, I'd like to share with you a bit of the history of Freemasonry getting started in this state. Well, as it happened, there were 3 lodges within the area that became Mississippi when Mississippi was ratified as a state. When that happened, those 3 lodges met in convention and determined to make themselves a Grand Lodge. And there's obviously a lot more history behind that. In fact, a portion of our Bicentennial Celebration was the reenactment of that event. I'm a member of the Mississippi Lodge of Research, and as such, we put on that play to reenact how the Grand Lodge was formed. And I had the unique opportunity of playing a man named Chilean Stiles, who was the first Grand Secretary, and he also served as a secretary for that convention. So it was a pretty interesting and unique way to be a part of such a memorable event. There were a lot of special moments at the Bicentennial. It was held in Natchez, Mississippi, which is where the first Grand Lodge was built, where Freemasonry found its home in Mississippi. The first 3 lodges, 2 were in Natchez and 1 was in Port Gibson, which is not too far away from Natchez. And something I did not know before this time, back in the heyday for the city of Natchez, it had, I forget the exact quote on this, but the point is a city that is now considered a sleepy historical sort of town was once the boon. That was where commerce took place and was just replete with millionaires and all those kind of things. So as you might imagine New York City or Los Angeles today, in its time, Natchez was to New York City for that time frame. So just a very profitable and rich place to be. So Freemasonry gets started in this area, and of course over the next 199 years we find ourselves to where we are today. So something I want to mention again before we get into the bulk of this, there were a series of events that were a part of this Bicentennial Celebration, and the part I want to share with you in just a moment is a presentation that I gave regarding a time capsule that we have had in our Grand Lodge office for several decades that nobody has opened. I don't know if it was always presumed that it would be opened at the Bicentennial or that it was just being kept around until some Grand Master decided it was finally time. But all it was a glass bottle that made a notation that it was from the Cornerstone of the original temple in Natchez. And so I'm trying not to get too far into what's explained in the video that I'm going to share with you, but there it sat, and come to find out it contained a lot of interesting history. So when the Grand Master contacted me and said that he was on his way to the Grand Lodge office to open this time capsule, could I join him? I made sure to find the time. And what transpired from there was me giving the presentation about what was in the actual time capsule, a presentation about the contents of the time capsule. But there's something about this Bicentennial Celebration that really set itself apart, and I don't know any other apt way to explain it than to say brotherly love. It was amazing how many people took up something and made sure that they helped. Now, there were certainly people who were in charge of the main key players of the entire event. People like our senior Grand Warden, Jason Jeffcoat. People like a District Deputy Grand Lecturer named Tyler Blaylock, who's a master of Harmony Lodge No. 1 there in Natchez. People like Justice and Brother Jim Kitchens, who serves on the Mississippi Supreme Court. people like Reed Quarles, the master of the Mississippi Lodge of Research. These key individuals reached out and delegated and made sure that they put the right people in the right places to make this event work. And in the end, it just did. It just worked. So as a brief rundown, Thursday, the day before the actual Bicentennial Celebration, there just happened to be a master's degree there at Harmony Lodge number 1. I did not attend that because I was too wrapped up in getting ready for the next day. But just think about this. We're about to, on the very next day, have the Bicentennial Celebration. So that would mean we have completed 2 full centuries of Masonry in Mississippi. So here, on the day before, is a man being raised as a Master Mason, making him the last person in the state of Mississippi to have been raised in the 2-century mark, if you will. I'm not sure what the right way to say that is. And that kind of comes in a little bit later. But then on Friday, all sorts of setup and preparation having to be done, and then just after lunch, the Mississippi Lodge of Research puts on the bicentennial reenactment of the formation of the Grand Lodge. Altogether a great event. There had to be over a dozen players in the event itself, and there were about 400 guests, 400 people there to witness that presentation. And then fast forward a few hours later, though if you were like me and in there trying to make sure all the videos working and so on and so forth, that was really a couple short hours. All of a sudden at 6 o'clock, it's time to have the big banquet dinner. So there's a big banquet dinner. Grand Master makes his remarks and gives a little bit of recognition to various individuals, and then it's my turn. I stand up and give the presentation that I'm about to show you in just a minute. Then that was followed up by some remarks by Justice Kitchens as he was introducing Senator Trent Lott, who's a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason and a Grand Cross recipient. So it was a privilege to be able to sit so close and listen to him and his thoughts on how Masonry has impacted him personally, impacted our national decision makers. He talked to us about how he would take the time to converse with other people in Congress who are Freemasons, who may not even have the same agenda that he has, so to speak, politically speaking, but he would ask them, you know, what would the craft do? How would Masons in general respond to this question? And they would just sort of have a little bit of a session there to try to tease that out and see where it would go, and leave their own personal convictions on the table and think about it from a craft perspective. And that's not to say that that always won out, but it is to say that it's sort of comforting to think that men that have that level of influence take the time to separate themselves from the politics and say, okay, I really believe in this Freemasonry, and it taught me to think about things in this way and that way, and to consider this opinion and to weigh this option, and how does that impact this situation. I thought that was a pretty intriguing thing to do. So when all of that was said and done, the next day was composed of degrees. We met over there at Harmony Lodge, and between 3 degrees, which were live degrees, people actually getting degrees, they opened up a lodge at first as Harmony Lodge, and then as Andrew Jackson Lodge, which is lodge number 2 in the state, and then as Washington Lodge number 3. And so they did each degree as a different lodge, and then there were different degree teams doing each degree. That is also the time where I finally was able to pick a winner for the apron. So if you remember last year, I participated in the Masonic Roundtable's No Shave November fundraiser and cancer awareness program. And as a part of that, I won the right to a hand-painted apron by Brother Dave Bacon over at Ashler Aprons. Well, rather than just have him paint something for me personally, I had him paint up a Mississippi Bicentennial apron, which I then raffled for the purpose of raising money for our scholarship fund here in Mississippi. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. At the end of the day, it didn't go the way that I had hoped. At the end of the day, about $300 was raised for the scholarship fund, which is not even 1/3 of a full scholarship. But, you know, it's more of the energy and the purpose behind it, the idea of paying it forward and trying to keep things moving. So, as it happens, I had the Grand Master, who did not buy a ticket, draw the ticket, and he happened to pull the name of our senior Grand Warden. So next year's Grand Master won the apron, and maybe there's a bit of karma in that, or something to that effect. So now what I would like to show you is the actual presentation I gave at that banquet. I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me since then and told me how much they appreciated the presentation, that they got something out of it, that it was worth the money that they spent on the banquet, and so many other things. And as much as I appreciate their recognition, going back to the brotherly love I started with, there's really, it would take a lot of thinking for me to try to imagine everything that worked in that presentation because of somebody else. So you'll notice in the video that I keep picking up papers. My wife was there with me throughout the entire thing, and she's handing me pieces of paper when I have an opportunity that I need to read from something up close because it wasn't displayed on the PowerPoint. She was there just to help and run errands the whole time we were trying to set that stuff up. The convention center people were amazingly helpful, and the list goes on and on. So the whole point here is, of course, to say that nothing is really one person's effort. And it really was Masonry in its purest form to see people time and time again throughout this event. Somebody would say, "That worked so well, it went so good, you did such a good job," and whoever that was being told to instantly said, "Thank you, but this person did that, I couldn't have done it without this person," and just sharing that energy around really, I think, brought the whole event up. So here is the video of that presentation. I hope that you enjoy it. I apologize that the audio in the recording is not great, but I assure you, again, one of those little brother helping brother things, the audio at the presentation was fantastic because of Brother Ricky Stevens, who serves on the Internet Committee with me, and he in turn would give credit to about 4 other people who helped him with getting the equipment, getting it set up, and so forth. So again, just a tremendous group effort to make this something that can truly be remembered by Masons, and something that in another 100 years, when they open up another time capsule, they can just say, wow, that had to actually have been really something that they put on. So here it is, the bicentennial opening of the time capsule from the original Grand Lodge building from the city of Natchez in 1827. I hope you enjoy.
You may have read on Facebook, Jared noted that there were some coins in that jar, that time capsule, and you may be surprised to know what the value of those coins are. So at this time, Jared has a PowerPoint display of his presentation that will show you the opening of that time capsule this past week in the Grand Lodge. You can continue to eat, and if you do 2 things at one time, just be careful with your fingers. So at this time, Jared, here it is, and here's the jar.
Thank you, those words are cool. My name is Jared Stanley. I'm a past master of Long Street Lodge and a member of the Mississippi Lodge of Research, and I'm very humbled to be invited by the Grand Master to share what we had found inside of this time capsule. As the Grand Master mentioned, there's many old and delicate items inside of the time capsule. So because of that, it's very impractical for us to line out the items for everybody to view. There's just too many delicate light papers that will blow away in the gentlest breeze and things that will deteriorate. So instead, we opened this previously, as the Grand Master said, we took some photographs, and I'm going to go through those with you. But before doing that, I wanted to show you the original jar, and we'll give some more pictures on this in just a second. But we do have the original jar here with us today. And the contents, as you can obviously tell, have been removed, and for the time being, have been placed in a much more easy to access jar. And I'll talk to you about what's in this jar in just a moment. But some documents, which were not too tightly wound, or were able to be unwound, we were able to flatten back out and preserve so that we can keep this in the Grand Lodge office for others to view in the future. So if you will permit me, I'm going to step down from the rostrum and be able to present this to you in a much better fashion from the floor. Before I get started, I want to make my own recognition. I'd like to thank Sister Betty Nanny. If you look over on the left and on the right, you see these presentations of the past Grand Masters of the state of Mississippi. Sister Nanny went to a considerable amount of effort to locate those pictures and place them into a PowerPoint presentation for us to be able to view tonight. So Sister Nanny, thank you for doing that work. So let's talk a little bit about this time capsule that we found. This is what it looked like in its original state, with all of the documents tightly wound up deep inside of it and firmly sealed. And I'll just go around and show you each one of those different sides of the jar, just so you can see each of the pieces that are in there and just how tightly they're wound up. This made for a very difficult review of what was in there, because the paper had grown brittle, and having been so tightly wound up, it was very hard to try to review the documents. I mention that at this point just to say, if you are ever involved in a time capsule project in the future, please don't roll the papers. All right? So we talked about, the Grand Master mentioned before about how we opened this beforehand. It's actually quite a very good thing that we did. We would have gotten here, everybody would have been excited about seeing the opening of the time capsule, and it would not have happened. One thing I'd like to point out, and it was very difficult to picture, so I hope you can see it, but this warping on the lid of the jar. This jar has been through a fire, and because of that, the glass was warped, and it probably led to a portion of why it was so difficult to open. So in looking for a way to open this jar, the Grand Master tried several different techniques, but then relented and said that it might be best to take this to a glass shop and see how they might recommend that we open the glass without disturbing the documentation. So that's what we did. We took it to a glass shop, and the first thing they tried to do was simply sever off the top of the lid away from the documents so that we could sort of pick our way through the lid at that point. Unfortunately, the blade that was available for the tool was not long enough. It could not reach into the thickness of this glass. So a new method had to be devised. We started to tap, I say we, glass folks, started to tap holes into the lid for the purpose of creating stress points so that we might be able to break the top of the lid off. Again, this was the only place we could access the jar that did not have contact with the documentation. So after going through and adding several stress points to the jar, they were in fact able to open it. So since I know that if I were you, I would want to see this jar open. So here it is. And there it is. Yay! It may not look like much, but I promise you that was a good couple hours of work, wasn't it, Grand Master, to get to that point. So with the lid officially cracked open, we were able to take the time capsule back to the safety of the Grand Lodge office so the Grand Master could examine its contents. So back here at the Grand Lodge office, this is the first time that most worshipers Thomas Cumberland started to extract what was inside of the time capsule. So here, all we could really see is some paper wadding. It honestly, from the outside, looked as though they simply were trying to make sure the top didn't crack. Like they just stuffed it with paper for good measure. But as the Grand Master started to extract it, we could notice that there was some silver material, some silver-colored metal. And it instantly should bring to the mind of most people in this room, I would imagine, that is some sort of a jewel from a lodge. So here it is a little bit closer up, a little bit more taken out. You can see more of the jewel and more of this deteriorated paper wadding that was placed around it. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you right now that this was not the only jewel that was inside the jar. And in fact, every jewel inside of the jar was wrapped in some sort of a paper, and every paper had the exact same notation on it. And that read, jewel, whoops, jewel from Old Cornerstone. Well, that instantly sort of perks our attention. Okay, jewels inside of a time capsule for a Masonic lodge. Well, that's something that you might expect. But why are we notating in this time capsule that's from the very first Grand Lodge office that this is from the Old Cornerstone? So that ought to kind of perk your ear up, and let's learn about why it actually is in there like that. As the Grand Master continued to unwind the wrappings from over these jewels, there was a little piece of paper that he discovered. And here you can see as he's examining this master's square, the wadding that was around it, here's that little note. So we'll get to that little note in just a second. Here is the master's jewel. This was the very first thing taken out of the time capsule. And probably only so because of the way that we went into it. By having to knock off the top of the lid, we actually examined the things that were on the innermost side, inside of the lid, before anything else. So here is the master's jewel. You notice it's a very simple design, but it's certainly very effective. It still gets the job done. Now, if you notice this little stamp on the side, I'd like to tell you a little something about that stamp. That actually says G.W. Capron. Now, I don't expect anybody knows who G.W. Capron was. I did not before doing this research. But that stamp is actually the mark of George Washington Capron. And I may be pronouncing the brother's name wrong, and I apologize if I am. He was born in Kentucky in 1805 and moved in 1826 to Natchez, Mississippi, where he wed Elizabeth Perry, the niece of Commodore Perry. The whole family moved to the Republic of Texas at about 1840, where they moved to Houston. Both the 1850 and 1860 U.S. Census records show him as a Houston jeweler. But the typical spoon-shaped stamps appearing on coins show that he was a silversmith as well. So essentially, by looking at this, we can start to make some assumptions. While there hasn't been any time between the opening of the capsule and today to verify what type of metal this may be made out of, we know that it has the stamp of a silversmith on it. We also have a particularly interesting thing. You notice, if you look really carefully, I know it's hard in the picture, but this N is either upside down or flipped inverted mirror-wise, however you want to look at it. I point this out because in all the examples of this brother's stamp that I have been able to locate, none of them have the N in reverse. So if you're a coin collector and you understand the value of things when there's an anomaly, it's of very particular interest to see that this stamp on this master's tool has a backwards letter. As I mentioned, there were other jewels in the lid of the jar. Here on the plum, you can see that there is another stamp. It is exactly as it is over on the master's square. And I do want to take a special moment just to mention that we're going to talk a little bit more about the history of this jar. Suffice to say, it has been through a lot more than being in the ground for nearly 200 years. And we believe that the damage to these jewels probably occurred at a previous time. It most certainly was not caused in our extracting the documentation of the jewels at this time. So we'll talk a bit more about that in just a minute. This is that note that I showed you on the table. This is the first piece of documentation other than the notation on the outside of the wrappings for the jewels that the Grand Master was able to read. So I'd like you to read along with me if you can, but I will be reading this as well. As you can see, it is on stationery from the Grand Office of the Grand, or from the Office of the Grand Treasurer of the Grand Chapter of Mississippi, Royal Archmasons, Companion J. Fogo Dixon. And the note reads, Natchez, Mississippi, February 22nd, 1941. J. Fogo Dixon, who rescued the old contents of Cornerstone that was deposited in 1827, was raised in June 1890 to build a new building, which was destroyed by fire in 1911. The original contents of Cornerstone was placed in a bottle, which was broken after several years, became so bad it had to be repacked in a new bottle, and as I had presented there to the Grand Lodge of Mississippi, I repacked them and presented them this 22nd day of February 1941. Yours truly, J. Fogo Dixon. So that document alone provides us with some significant history as to what this time capsule has been through. But the very next piece of paper that the Grand Master discovered gave us some even further information, and I'd like you to try to follow along with me on this one as well. It reads, I should say, it is on Natchez Cotton Mills Company stationery, so there's some pretty significant historical value just to the stationery that it's on. This document reads, Natchez, Mississippi, May 15, 1890. This jar, containing relics taken from the cornerstone of the old temple, will be sealed by Mrs. R.F. Learned, daughter of the architect of the old temple, and wife of the chairman of the finance committee of the new temple. And this was signed by various members of the committee on contents of Cornerstone. So for some further historical interest, I thought you'd like to know that the architect of the old temple that's referenced in this letter is Brother Henry Brown. He was of Andrew Jackson Lodge number 2. His daughter, who is mentioned in the note as being the person who sealed the jar, is Elizabeth Lizzie Christine Brown. She married Rufus Frederick Learned in 1868, which explains her being listed here as Mrs. R.F. Learned. And you can see Brother Learned's signature on the document as well. The architect, Brother Brown, his daughter, Lizzie, and her husband, Rufus Learned, are all buried here in the Natchez City Cemetery. So be sure to keep an eye out as you're visiting the city. And if you haven't been by the cemetery, let me assure you, the gentleman running the show out there is very helpful, and he will take you straight to any grave you ask him about. Okay, so with the information contained in these notes, we can propose a timeline of events surrounding this time capsule. In 1827, the time capsule was sealed into the cornerstone of the first Grand Lodge building here in Natchez. In 1890, that temple was demolished on purpose for the construction of a new building on the same site. So at that time, the building was demolished, the cornerstone was raised, and the time capsule was retrieved and resealed. Next, in 1911, that new building burned down, and a broken time capsule was recovered. In 1941, the contents were placed into a new jar, sealed again, and presented to the Grand Lodge of Mississippi. And here today in 2018, the jar is opened and examined by Most Worshipful Grand Master Thomas Pomeroy. Now, if you're following with me and I haven't bored you too much, you will realize that we still have not gone past the lid of the jar. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the contents that were wrapped up inside of it. Here's a picture of the Most Worshipful Grand Master extracting the very first document that was rolled up in the main section of the jar. As it so happened, that piece had a notation on it that said, photos of old temple. And if newspapers and other documents are not hard to unroll when they're dry and brittle, I promise you photographs are. But I want to share some of them with you. They're not the best photos because they're photos of rolled up and degraded photos. And we're also going to go in a little bit of a reverse chronological order. So we're going to start from where the time capsule came back out of the ground. So here is a photo of the raising of the cornerstone. If you look over here, you can still see a segment of the wall still standing from the temple. But you can clearly see the hole in the ground, the trivet, and the cornerstone has actually already been extracted and is laying on the ground. So that is the cornerstone when it was raised in 1890 for the purpose of building a new building. Now here is that old building as it was being demolished. In this photograph, you can see the gable section of the roof has been removed, and there are no windows or shutters in the building whatsoever. If we go back in time a little further, this is the full completed building before it began to be demolished. So here you can see the gable and the shutters fully intact. Alright, now we're going to go into the interior of the building. This is a picture of the lodge room facing the east. So obviously you can make out the key features, the altar, 3 chairs in the east, secretary's desk, treasurer's desk, and such. Let's take a little bit closer of a view of that. Here is just the east itself. You can get a much clearer view of the chairs, the oriental chair, and of particular interest to me, a painting behind the oriental chair. Let's take a little closer look at that. So this painting behind the oriental chair has some pretty common masonic symbols with it, and I just want to show everybody, because you're probably used to seeing these in many different places. We have, of course, the sun. This, though slightly obscured by this curtain, can only be a moon with 7 stars around it. We also have the Tyler sword pointing at the Book of Constitutions, a sword pointing at a heart, a blazing pot of incense, a scythe, the winged hourglass. Down here there is a coffin and a spade. And my thing doesn't want to fight me. And lastly, a sprig of acacia. Just a really beautiful example of 200-year-old artwork inside of the first lodge building. Well, inside this lodge building, not the first building, but inside of the first Grand Lodge building that was built here in Natchez. And lastly, as far as the interior photos go, this is a picture facing the west. So you can see the station in the west. All right. The next item that came out was another note, but not so much a note. Something of a little more interest and intrigue. This is actually a will. And I don't expect that you can read that too well from wherever you're sitting, but I'm going to read the contents of this will to you. Pay attention, there might be a joke involved, and I didn't write it. Know all men by these presents, whereas I, William Provan, physician in Natchez and state of Mississippi, have made and do hereby make and declare this to be my will. The said William Provan, being in good health of body and of sound mind and memory, I give and bequeath to that member of the Grand Lodge of the state of Mississippi who has the longest nose the coins which I have herein deposited, the same to him to have and to hold and to his heirs forever, in testimony of which I hereto set my hand and seal this 22nd day of June, 1827. Signed by William Provan, with a little PS type of a note saying that the word "the" had to be removed and the word "to" put into its place. Now there's something of more particular interest at the bottom of this note. If you look real carefully at this slide, you can see that there's clearly another piece of paper that has been affixed to it. Now this is a very strange note. And we may or may not have a few government servicemen or servants of the government in the room today. So I hope they'll take this note with a grain of salt. Brother Provan wrote in his note, "May our happy government exist in full vigor as long as these coins shall last. P.S. which..." Oh, God. P.S. which which I very much doubt. Well, the coins are still here, brother, and we think the government's going to get by. Of interest, a little bit about Brother Provan. A little cursory research shows that Brother Dr. Provan was a member of the Board of Medical Censors of the state of Mississippi in the Western District. So what are these coins that Brother Provan put in there? Well, here they are. We have 4 coins to talk about: a 50-cent piece, a 25-cent, a 10-cent, and a 1-cent piece. So let's talk a little bit about these pennies. All right, so this is the 1-cent piece. Before I get any further into these, I would like to acknowledge a brother who assisted me with this. He's Worshipful Brother Danny Fisher, past master of Longstreet Lodge. He is somewhere in this room, I hope. Brother Fisher is admittedly not a certified appraiser, but he is a very well-informed brother when it comes to coin collecting. And for the purposes of this presentation, I think the things I'm sharing with you are good, fair information. So this 1-cent piece is an 1825 coronet head large cent. It's a fairly common example, even in the excellent condition that it's in. Sold privately, it could fetch over $125. It may not sound like much, but remember, $125 in pennies is 12,500 pennies. So it has gone up just a little bit in value. Now let me tell you about the 50-cent piece. This is an 1824 cap bust half dollar. It's believed that it would grade at what's called an EF 40. This coin would fetch over $250 if sold privately. The next coin we'll address is the dime, the 10-cent piece. This is a 1824 cap bust dime, believed to be of the second variety and of a VF20 quality. Sold privately, this coin would be worth over $2,000. A little bit more rare. And lastly, the 25-cent piece. This is a 1825 cap bust quarter. It is believed to be of the MS63 grade. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, the point here is to say that it's as mint as a coin that has gone around in a couple hands can be mint. It's a very good condition coin. This coin would sell for at least $4,000. So if you didn't have any interest in coin collecting today, I imagine that you might take a second glance at your change jar now. All right? So the Grand Master wanted to make sure we all had kind of an idea about the different sizes of these coins. So here's a good representation showing a dime from today with one other than a quarter and a penny, but we did not have the half dollar on hand to show you a comparison of that. So just a little example of how things have changed over 200 years, even in our own currency. Now there was another piece of documentation inside of this jar that spoke about these coins. It was a newspaper clipping. You remember we already learned that this jar had to be repacked at least once, but it seems like twice. Well, in 1890, when they unpacked it and got it ready to go into the new foundation, they had a newspaper man on hand, and he provided a list of everything that was inside of the jar. So that made it very handy for our research to determine if anything had been added into it in future generations. And other than the notes explaining to us what had been done previously, it does not appear that anything new had been added to the time capsule. But of particular interest, you'll notice that there is a reference to a silver dollar from 1799. That silver dollar is not in the jar. What happened to it, we don't know. I personally like to think that back in 1899, a brother with a very long nose got a very expensive coin. All right, we're getting almost to the end of this here. The next item was a copy of the Constitution and bylaws of the Grand Lodge of the state of Mississippi, along with several other copies of various Grand Lodge proceedings. There were also several copies of the aerial, which is a newspaper from Natchez. It was in print from 1825 to 1829. There were also several copies of the Mississippi Statesman and Natchez Gazette. That's one paper that was also from Natchez. It was a combination of the two papers named in the title, and that publication as a joint effort only was published in 1826 and 1827. The newspapers appear to be the latest issue prior to the sealing of the time capsule. There was also an 1827 copy of the Mississippi and Louisiana Almanac inside of the time capsule. And now the next slide, I'm going to leave up for a minute because it's tedious to have somebody read to you a PowerPoint slide, but the next slide is just nothing but words, but there's some pretty interesting things on there. What we have is the order of the procession at the laying of the cornerstone of the Masonic Hall, and the order of the ceremony laying the cornerstone of the Masonic Hall. These documents are so, I don't even know what the correct word for it is. They don't look like they were printed. They look like they were embossed. These were one document that we could see from the outside of the jar, and it looked like it was impressed. And we didn't know what that was. It looked like Brother Conley thought that it might look like some sheet music. I thought maybe it was some sort of an official seal or stamp. But what it turns out to be is just the printing method that was used for these two documents. So something that I think is kind of interesting while we're still here in Natchez is to understand that when they talk about procession, they actually march from one physical location to another, and they did it in a very specific way. So over on the document on the right, this is the order, ordering the ceremony of the laying of the cornerstone. And here we can read that the Grand Lodge convened at the courthouse at 10 a.m. And then they started the procession at 11 a.m. and how they proceeded to get down to the Grand Lodge. So as returning Natchez and looking at all the things that are interest of the city's history and Masonic history, don't just pay attention to where the Spaniards traveled or where the French traveled or anything like that. You may want to go to the original courthouse site and think about what path our brethren took as they went to go lay the cornerstone of our very first Grand Lodge building. Okay. The last piece of documentation I want to share with you is something that I did not know was a thing with cornerstones. It's an actual document that specifically notates what the stone is. I don't know any other way to explain it than just to show it to you. Now this document is very thick. In today's terms, we might say it was printed on stock paper. And then having been rolled up, folded, and stuffed inside of a jar for 200 years, it was quite difficult to unroll. So there's your explanation on why I don't have a nice, flat, easy-to-read picture. But here is what it says, and you can try reading along with me. It says, the foundation stone of this building, erected to God and dedicated to the Holy St. John's, was laid with solemn Masonic honors on this 24th day of June in the year of the Christian era 1827 and Lucius 5827, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 51st, by the Grand Lodge of the state of Mississippi, which is then followed by a list of the officers of the Grand Lodge and a list of those on the building committee. So, Worshipful Grand Master, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this presentation and of opening the time capsule. Past Grand Masters, thank you for everything that you have done to bring us to this day in our history, where we can look back at a time capsule from nearly 200 years ago and imagine just what it was like to have these brethren and their families come together for their very first meetings. And thanks to each and every one of you for coming and being here tonight to make this event a success. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your time here in Natchez. Thank you.
I know this is a much longer video than anything else I've ever put on this channel before, so I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope there was something there. I'm sure that because there was speculation involved that I didn't get that presentation 100% historically accurate, but it was something that everybody was able to enjoy at the Bicentennial. I didn't want to say this before the video, but I want to give you a little timeline, and this isn't the special message, this is just PS. So imagine this, on Monday at about 10 a.m. I get a phone call from the Grand Master saying, hey, I'm coming to open this time capsule. We don't even finish that until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just getting it open. That left me Tuesday and Wednesday to put together some sort of a PowerPoint, and it wasn't until Monday evening that I found out I'd be doing a PowerPoint presentation. So I had Tuesday and Wednesday to work on this, and then Thursday was a travel day, and Friday is when I gave the presentation. So I would have loved to have delved into this, and of course it probably would have turned it into an hour-long presentation, but I feel like there was so much more that could have been extrapolated out of this. So hopefully maybe I can do a research paper on it before those items go back into a time capsule again for next century. So time will tell. So here's the note. Here's what I wanted you to see. I know a lot of you have been contacting me privately to say, hey Jared, I love your videos, I miss them, are you okay, and etc. So I'm fine. Hello, good to see you again. But the summer's just a busy time of the year, isn't it? I think most of us feel that way. I think, you know, that's part of the reason why you find so many lodges that go dark during the summer. But for us personally, we've had a lot going on. You can see behind me the big balloon sitting up there. We have 3 birthdays in July, mine being one of them and our 2 sons being the other. Of course, we have our anniversary. That's what the card below the balloon is. It was a card we got for our anniversary. And then of course there was all the preparation leading up to this bicentennial. I was going to practices on the other side of the state. I'll let you look it up if you're not familiar with it, but I live very close to the city of Meridian, and the Lodge of Research is in the city of Jackson. And once a week, or once every other week, we were meeting out there in Jackson to practice that bicentennial. So a lot of driving. Just an awful lot of things going on over the last couple months that have made me step away from worrying about videos. I knew you'd be there waiting whenever I got back around to it. So videos will be coming back out. Just got to get back into that flow, don't you? And just in case that doesn't sound like it ought to have taken up all my time, there is something else coming. There is something else I've been working on with a couple other brothers that I look forward to sharing with you that's also taken up some of my time. I was hoping it was going to be ready to announce in this video, but due to some error on my part, it's not ready for now. So it'll just have to be another announcement another day. So there's the story about what's going on. I do want to say I appreciate all of you who have still been following along with the channel and checking up with me, or following along with me over on Facebook. That's the last thing I'll mention here, is that, you know, these videos, when they come out like they used to do, they're a weekly thing, sometimes twice and maybe even 3 times a week. But in the lulls in between, I'm still posting pictures, sharing education and other things over on my Facebook account. Now I know there's a lot of people who want nothing to do with Facebook. Fair enough, that's fine. I'm just letting you know that there is another source that I use, another medium that I use, where if you want to stay up with me in between videos, you can go to facebook.com/whatisamason and you can find me there all the day as long. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.